Before we get going on drawing, I want to talk with you all about what I mean by drawing, how I want you to think about drawing throughout this course, and I'm just going to get some basic vocabulary. I'm going to split this lecture into two different videos just so it's easier to consume. So the first part we're going to talk about why people make drawings, and then the second part I'll talk about some ways of thinking about seeing. The reason I'm going to focus so much on the idea of seeing is because I think it's the most important thing when we're talking about drawing. Most students come into a basic drawing class, I think, I could be wrong, but most students come in with these definitions of drawing that are up top in their mind. Those definitions have to do more with making a picture, so drawing onto, if you look at the top one, to produce a picture or diagram by making lines and marks, especially with the pen or pencil on paper. This is taken from older meaning of the word draw, which is just to pull or move something in a specific direction or to drag something across. So if you think of like a horse-drawn buggy. So I think students come in thinking that I'm going to teach them a whole bunch of like tricks for dragging their hand around on a piece of paper to make them better at producing a picture or diagram. There's a few things like that I can teach you, but not a whole lot. We're most of us pretty competent with using our hands already. I can teach you a little bit about hand-eye coordination, and I can point some things out that you probably haven't thought of, but we all use our hands to do all kinds of stuff, so there's no magic tricks I can teach you with your hand. Really, what I'm here to teach you about is the second definition of drawing that I have on here, which has to do with extraction. Extracting something from something else, obtain something from a particular source. So if you think about like, oh, I went and had my blood drawn, I had my blood drawn taken out of me. Visual reality, our visual perceptions in front of us, is information rich. It's full of blood, and I'm here to teach you different methods for extracting that information out from the visual reality in front of you. So this class is much more about seeing. And by seeing, I mean drawing information from. You can't draw onto until you've drawn from. You have to get the information out and make sense of it first, and then you can put it down on paper. So we're going to be much more focused on different ways of thinking about seeing as we go forward. That will be the second half of the lecture that I post here, is talking about that. But first, I just wanted to talk about some of the reasons why people would draw too, why we would actually make an object a drawing. The most obvious answer would be to make a piece of art. That's probably what most of you are thinking, like duh. So here we have a charcoal drawing by Justin Ballier. This is a wonderful piece of photorealistic art. You could easily see this framed and hung in a gallery and selling for money. Same with this piece by Susan Schwab, Polyphony number 4, in copper and silver point on canvas. The reason I'm showing these two images back to back is because in this class we're going to be aiming towards realism. Not even just photorealism like here, but realism, and I'll explain that difference later. But I don't want you to think that that's the way to judge art, that good art is realistic art. It's just the way that I can get you to see the things I'm wanting you to see when I'm asking you to learn to look better, to teach you these different kinds of way of looking. If I don't have something to have you look at, I can't teach you about seeing. So this type of art, non-representational art, or what a lot of you would call abstract art, is perfectly fine. There's all kinds of great art made that way. It's just not useful for the things I'm trying to teach you, so we won't do any of it in the semester. We're going to be aiming for realism because it will help you see information. You already all know how to draw. If all we mean by drawing is just dragging a pen across a piece of paper, you all do it when you write. It's just in our culture, unlike in some Eastern cultures, we don't value writing in the same way. We're not so much focused on the calligraphy of the character. And these days, we probably just spend most of our time typing anyway. So we've lost the sense of beauty of line that you would get in a culture that values the calligraphy more. What you'll be doing in this class is similar to what Pablo Picasso was doing here. He was 16, I believe, when he drew this. This was an assignment. This is called academic art. It's a good enough drawing because he's a very talented fellow that it could be put into a frame and sold in a museum, especially since Picasso's about as famous as it gets. But that's not why it was made. It was made as a tool for learning. That's what you're going to be doing in this class. All your drawings are not art. They're learning exercises that are going to help you learn how to see better. If you produce a piece of art on the way that could be sold, that's fantastic. But we're doing academic art. Working in the online environment, you're going to be sending these things to me, and I'll be drawing all over the top of them on Photoshop. Luckily, you won't have me drawing all over the top of your actual drawing, so that's a little bit different than how my classes normally run. But this is a collaborative effort between me and you to help you learn, and that's how I want you to think about these drawings. If you think they're art, you'll be too precious about them, and you won't do as well as you could. Artists use drawing as a way of forcing themselves to observe because it's about seeing, and it's forcing you to make decisions about how you're putting what you see on the paper. It teaches you to be a better observer. So here we have a sketchbook page from Leonardo da Vinci where he's just learning about human anatomy. Da Vinci was both an artist and a scientist. In this particular moment, though, he was just using his skills as an artist to help him be a scientist. Him and Michelangelo and guys in that time period were getting very interested in the anatomy underneath the surface of the skin. This was something that had been taboo for a long time. It was illegal to do this because you were desecrating God's creations if you cut open bodies. So they were like sneaking around in the middle of the night cutting open bodies, not because they were weird perverts or anything, but just because they were scientifically curious, and they realized that not only would it help them draw and paint humans better, but it was scientifically helpful and medically helpful to know what was going on in the body. And you'll see that here, Da Vinci figuring out how a shoulder works. Another thing that he's able to do that's really nice about drawing is if he just photographed a cut open cadaver, you'd be seeing all kinds of information at once. But when you're drawing, you can abstract out, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. You can abstract out certain information to help pay attention to other information. So here he's abstracting out a lot of information and just focusing you on the major forms of the muscles. Then here he's ignoring the muscles and he's paying more attention to the ligaments and the veins. He could do a drawing that has all of that stuff, but it maybe be a little confusing. So it's a way of observing and then the way of describing information for scientific purposes. Some artists, like Gustav Klimt, he was already a master artist at this point. He didn't necessarily need to do practice to get better, but what he did need is to keep fresh. And so Klimt and most artists just sketch to stay fresh and also to generate ideas. So he would have had models hanging around the studio and had them getting into different poses, and that would be a pleasurable activity for him. It would help him generate ideas, and it would help him keep his skills at the top of the game. This idea of generating ideas is really clear here in this page out of Michelangelo's sketchbook. He was doing a study for this piece of the Sistine Chapel called the Libyan Sibyl. So this is the finished piece, and you can see the sketch here. The Sistine Chapel was painted in a style of painting called fresco. That means that the plaster that goes on the wall is colored. So you're painting with the plaster. And if you mess up, you have to let the plaster dry and chip out that entire part of the wall and then do it again the next day. It's not like you're just painting with acrylic on top of the wall, and if you mess up, you just paint over it. So you have to know exactly what you're going to be doing when you're doing a fresco. You can't make any mistakes or you waste a day's worth of work. So he had to work everything out ahead of time very clearly. I love this particular page of sketches because you'll see how minute of detail he's going into when he's making his decisions. I mean, he has a figure here which is mostly like what the finished piece is going to look like in terms of lighting. But you'll see here that he gets down to more like a structure of the anatomy. You know, just how the basic forms go without the light mapped over them. And then here we see he redid the face. To me, it looks like this face maybe was a little too harsh or masculine for him. I don't know for sure. This is just what I'm seeing. And then this face to me looks like he's trying a softer, more effeminate lighting approach. You'll see that like the cheek here is softened up and stuff. So he's playing with that. He's zooming in on the hand to try and rearrange the hand see what feels good. But the part that cracks me up that I really like is right here. He spent 3 whole drawings just figuring out how much of the toenail he wanted to see. And you can see him, and this is going to be something that's important for us throughout the semester that I'll be giving you assignments to help you with, is learning how to talk to yourself in drawing. Here he's talking to himself. He can't make the decision until he sees it. So he does it 3 times, and then he can make that decision based on the visual information. So sketching is very, very important to us. Sketching will also help you develop your imagination, and we'll do a number of assignments that have to do with that. These smaller assignments that will help you learn how to just generate imagery. A lot of people, myself included, don't have pictures in their heads, and I hear this all the time from students. Well, I don't have an imagination. I'm not creative. We'll come up with some strategies to help you be creative. I don't get pictures in my head either, but I think most people that saw my art or my sketchbooks would think I had all kinds of crazy things in my head. So I'll be able to help you. I'll be able to help you get there. We'll do assignments for that. These type of, we'll call them thumbnail or rough sketches that are just an artist talking to themselves and generating an idea. They don't always have to end up in a 2-dimensional piece of art like a painting or another drawing. Here you can see Marc de Souvereau doing this really rough ink sketch. Probably took him about 30-40 seconds, it looks like. And that was the starting point for Ik Ook, this sculpture that's actually a bunch of like I-beams balanced out and weighted against each other. I'm sure there were any number of drawings in between this point and this point, but that's the good starting point, and you can see the similarity in forms. There's obviously changes made as well, but he got the idea out, and once the idea is out, then you can start to manipulate it. If you leave an idea in your head, it's a little bit difficult to manipulate. And we'll see another really great example of this with Frank Gehry's original sketch here for what eventually became the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Frank Gehry is a very famous architect, and you'll see in these basic scribbles that he did the seeds of this project. Now this one guaranteed went through hundreds of drawings, blueprints, sending it off to architectural engineers and physicists and people that would figure out how to even make the materials work. But you can see the forms here, like this shape here turns into this shape here, that wobbly shape there turns into that wobbly shape. Just the overall sense of tall here, thinner here. It looks like there would have been a tower or something over here that maybe got taken out, but otherwise you have this from thin to thick thing going on. You see this form here kind of looks like that. This little piece here looks like that. So he's just getting the idea out. I don't have all the hundreds of drawings in between, but I guarantee he talked to himself in drawing and refined from there. So that's something else we'll be exploring beyond just observing realistic objects. And then I would say also drawing is just something that humans do. You give a human a stick and some sand and they're going to scribble something in it, or you give them a pen and you stick them on a phone call, with some crappy jazz music playing in the background, and you're going to sit there and doodle probably. So there's not even the need for it to have a purpose. It's just something we do. I'm sure that we could come up with any other number of reasons why people make drawings, why people draw too, but these are just some of the ones that I came up with real quick to help you get a sense for it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this and then do a second lecture, but technically I'm just going to be continuing on with the idea of, now that we've seen why people draw, I'm going to look into this idea of how do we start to think about seeing. So we've talked about drawing to, now I'm going to go talk about drawing from.